Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you who I have not met, which is probably a few in the room, my name is Cheryl Richards, and I have the pleasure of serving as the CEO and Regional Dean of Northeastern University Charlotte, which is your newest member of the higher education community in the Charlotte region. We actually opened our doors a year ago in October of 2011, and then enrolled students a year ago this month in January, and we are already up to about 135 graduate students here taking classes through our professional master's degrees. Many of them are in a hybrid format, so they come one night every other week, or they have an opportunity to do some programs online. But in our commitment to coming to the Charlotte region, we were about more than just serving students in an enrollment capacity. We have a very robust history of research, and our signature is in co-op, which is experiential learning, where our undergraduates rotate 6 months of academic experience with 6 months of paid work experience in communities all around the globe. So right now, 92 countries. We have students, and we put about 3,000 students out every term in co-op experiences. So I invite you, if you have an organization that is looking for co-op students, please see one of us afterwards. We'd love to talk to you about that. And then equally as important as that is that we wanted to give back to the community. And so we launched this Local Leader Global Impact Speaker Series last fall, where we bring in a local leader, someone you know very well who needs very little introduction usually, and we pair them with one of our faculty experts out of the university, kind of showcase the breadth of the university's reach. So today's program is the 4th in our series. You have information on your seats about the 5th in our series, which will be in February on sustainability policy. We invite you to register for that as well. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to today's discussion. I'm not even going to say panelists, because you're really going to have a lively discussion around public education. There's been a lot of conversation in our community around public education. You all know our new superintendent, who, if I call Dr. Morrison, will quickly correct me and say it's Heath. So make note of that when you're going to ask questions. Who came to our community in July of last year from Nevada, and has quickly made an impact in our community, going on a listening tour, engaging a lot of the constituents, and really trying to figure out how can we address some of the concerns that we've had as a community, but more importantly, how do we address public education as a nation? And I think we're very fortunate to have someone like Heath at the helm here in Charlotte. No, he will do some great things for us here. The perspective that he brings is beyond local, obviously, having worked in several other districts. But we also wanted to bring in Dr. John LaBrie, who I will also call John. I'll give him one formal introduction, who is our Vice President of Professional Education at Northeastern University, and also serves as our Dean of the College of Professional Studies, which is really where most of our professional master's degrees are housed. So the population that John works with is the adult continuing educator who is seeking advancement through additional degree attainment. John also has a very national perspective. Recently was named by ACHE as local lead, or as the Leadership Award. Tell me the correct title.
Leadership Award.
The Leadership Award through the American Council on Continuing Education for Higher Education, and so a widely respected leader nationally on higher education topics. So we thought today's conversation could go from pre-K all the way to PhD, and we'll probably dabble on a lot of different policy things in the meantime there. So welcome to both of you. Eric Spanberg will serve as our moderator. You know Eric from the Charlotte Business Journal, and he's moderated all of these and done a fine job. So Eric, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you. Of course, you do need to call me Dr. Spanberg because I don't have a doctorate. It's just a personal thing. So thank you, everybody. Let me know if you can't hear me, if I'm not loud enough. But this is our first one of 2013. Of course, we're talking about public education. And just a brief couple of thoughts. When you ask just about anyone, whether it's parents and teachers or CEOs and politicians, they all point to schools and universities as a crucial part of community success. And as our panelists here can tell you, just about everyone, no matter their expertise, has an opinion on how to improve the quality of education. So we want to get into some of the issues about not just workforce, but how to make the lower levels of school better as we prepare that workforce, and also talk a little bit about what happened in Connecticut last month, which is obviously on a lot of people's minds. And even as John mentioned this morning, our governor made some interesting comments about higher education yesterday, so that may come up as well. So without further ado, enough from Dr. Spanberg, we will start. I guess before we get into the policy issues, let's start with Newtown, because I think that's on everyone's mind when we talk about education right now. Can each of you give some perspective on what you think might be effective to limit or hopefully eliminate those kinds of events?
Well, good morning. Let me first of all begin by thanking Cheryl and Northeastern for hosting this. And just to say, I was driving in, I was listening to all the Super Bowl coverage, and the conversation was who's playing hurt this week. And Cheryl's a little under the weather, but you never know it because she's just standing up here. So thank you, Cheryl, for your leadership in hosting us today. You know, every day you get up and you try to think about how you're going to make a difference in the lives of students. And you want to spend your time thinking about how to improve academics and the quality of teaching and learning, and to reach out to parents and do all things we know make a difference. But I've always said our most fundamental obligation, our most sacred duty, is the safety of our children. And so we spend a lot of time and planning to make sure we get that right. And actually, research shows over the last 20 years, schools in the United States, in terms of what happens within the school building, have never been safer. But we continue to see this, what seems to be a never-ending barrage of violent acts perpetrated on our young children, on our schools. And not only schools, it's, you know, what preceded Newtown, Connecticut was there was a shooting at a mall, there was a shooting at a house of worship. Prior to that, there was a shooting in Aurora, Colorado at a movie theater. And so I think it just speaks to a society right now where there's far too many ways to access weapons that can hurt or kill, and far too many ways to address mental health and illness. And so I think until we really can grapple with that as a country, we're going to continue, unfortunately, to see these type of events. That being said, what we do in the public education system is every time there is one of these events, we look at what happened, we say, what can we learn if that had happened in our school district at one of our schools? And we try to make sure that our security procedures are as good as they can be. We look at things like facilities, how many security folks that we have in our buildings, and we try to get better. But it is troubling. It is, actually, we were together that day when I first learned about it. And it is every parent's nightmare, it is every teacher's nightmare, and I promise you it's every superintendent's nightmare. And as a country, we just have to come up with some better solutions.
Just on a personal level, the Newton shootings really actually kind of affected my family quite personally. I have 5 children of my own, and the Aurora shootings and even the Virginia Tech shootings, where I knew people who worked in that provost's office there during that incident, really you were able to kind of separate yourself, but seeing the face of the children and seeing your own children's faces really kind of brought back a real personal, visceral reaction for us in our household. But university campuses have struggled with this issue, just as public schools have. And in many campuses, they've gone to pretty much a full-time lockdown. They're gated communities where you walk on campus and you can't get on campus without figuring out a security system. And I think that just generally speaking, that kind of sends out the wrong perception of what education should be about. Education should be about opening up. Education should be about expanding horizons and not limiting them. And so one of the things that has happened nationally within universities, especially in the wake of the Virginia Tech shootings, has been a much more systematic examination of security on campus. And what universities need to do to communicate to their communities in using a lot of the technologies that are available to us. But the more sophisticated work that is being done, I think, is coming out of our counseling staffs and the responsiveness of working directly one-on-one with faculty to identify individual students who show signs of trouble and how to deal with that in a confidential manner without violating students' kind of rights to privacy, but at the same time kind of ensuring that the campus community is a robust, healthy, vibrant community that can operate outside of the umbrella of fear. And I am an advocate of not having firearms on campus, but I don't think this is exclusively a firearms issue. This is an issue of really having the community spend a lot of time and energy focused on its members and understanding who belongs to the community and what's going on in people's lives. College campuses can be little cities, 30, 40,000 people, and we have an obligation to get to know everybody, especially the student population. So it's never going to go away entirely. I'm a realist in that regard. Tragedies will be part of our lives, but I think limiting those and trying to prevent the ones we can, and actually helping the people who are in a state of mind where they would even contemplate either shooting themselves or shooting others, is really important. Keeping in mind that 60% of all gun violence in this country is suicides. And so we see student populations, and I've had to actually talk to parents just this past year. I had to call parents whose daughter had committed a suicide. And it's a very painful, hard experience to do that. So I think it's a very complicated issue. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Before we go a little broader, Heath, I did want to ask you, I think you have taken a look, or you are looking now, at what steps CMS might take. Can you just offer the audience a little bit of perspective on what you've learned so far and what you're thinking in that area?
Yeah, as I said, every time one of these events happen, we go through the scenario of, again, what had happened here, what could we have done, what did we learn? I think the conversation about should we put armed security guards at every school, the reality is that except for having an armed security guard at that school in Newtown, everything else you would want to see happen. I mean, they had great processes and procedures. They had a single point of entrance. Every kind of reasonable security that you could have had, they had, except for that. Would that have made a difference? I guess it depends on your point of view. Most people will tell you that any kind of armed security individual at a school probably could fire off 2 or 3 shots in the time span that individual with that type of weapon could fire off 100. So you've got 3 shots versus 100. But so what we're doing is we're looking at it from 3 primary aspects. We're looking at our security processes and systems. Again, is everything as tight as it should be? Does every school have their updated plans? Or are they constantly reminding everybody about their plans? Because we do a lot at the beginning of the year. We got to constantly stay vigilant on that throughout the year. We are looking at what would be the opportunities if we chose to do this, to add more security force to our schools. We spend a lot of time predominantly looking at our facilities, and so how do we try to get single point of access, especially at our elementary schools? How do we add more cameras? We have a lot of open campuses, so in many ways we're like little mini colleges. They become very, very challenging in terms of, even if you had 5 additional security folks, it wouldn't be enough because of so many ways that students can come in and out of the campus. But we're looking at some strategic use of fencing. So we're looking at it from all of those aspects. I think what this poses is, again, a national issue. It resonates in terms of the faces. I mean, I think that is just what impacted all of us, was seeing those faces of these young children over and over again. And as a country, we just have to be better in that. But what I'm interested in now is the conversations at state and local levels about policy. Whether or not we ought to put an armed security guard at every school, I think that's a matter of public debate, and probably a very worthy public debate. I think the concept, some of the ideas I've heard about having teachers and principals carrying weapons on campus, I can't state how much I oppose that. I think that's a very poor idea for a lot of very obvious reasons. And then even the idea of training every teacher and principal about looking at areas of maybe students who are suffering from some sort of mental illness or challenge. And I get that, and I understand that. I'm not saying I necessarily oppose that, but I think it brings into a broader issue of when people say, well, what's wrong with public education today? And let's first of all have this conversation about, well, let's really ferret out what's wrong and right about public education. But I don't think people understand how much public education has been saddled with every time there's a societal challenge. We say, well, let's give it to the schools to challenge, and so, what we're asking our teachers and our principals to do that have nothing to do with teaching reading, writing, science, social studies. And again, not that they're bad, but when you don't add any time to the day and you don't add resources and you just continue to pile more and more things on that are not directly about the teaching and learning, and then come back and say, well, what's happening with the teaching and learning? I think that has to also be part of the public discourse as well.
John, I lied. I do want to ask you one other question about that, which is because you made the comment that I think you knew a provost at Virginia Tech. I'm just curious, and you're on a college campus every day, as you mentioned. What kind of change have you seen in higher education, particularly since Virginia Tech? Because I think that was a turning point.
So I think that you're seeing a much more integrated kind of working relationship between a campus's security force, a police office, as well as the counseling office, and how we go about training faculty and staff to identify students who might be, exhibiting signs of hostile behavior. Prior to Virginia Tech, those operations tended to be fairly siloed. The police department kind of stayed within their boundaries and ticketed cars on campus and that sort of thing. The counseling office took care of students that came into their offices. But you're seeing a much bigger push around outreach from the student affairs staff, from the police staff, and trying to have a much more integrated conversation about the life of the campus and what are the early warning signs and how much of that information. You also have seen the the campus IT departments become much more engaged around communication, how to use instant messaging, texting, uploading messages immediately to the university's website. The Virginia Tech case was a breakdown in communications that made a tragic case even more tragic. Our ability today, where virtually every student has a cell phone, to push out a text message within minutes of an event to all of those students on campus is a very effective tool. So we've really have come together as a campus community to take a look at it. And again, that's just been an insular kind of inward-looking activity, and it hasn't even broached kind of the topic of what's been done kind of on the outside. But that's what I've seen the biggest change there.
You do have to talk about education, not just public safety. So, Heath, why don't we start with, you had your 100-day listening tour, and you obviously had your report that you presented to the community. Talk a little bit about what you learned during that and also what's happened since then, because it's been, 5 or 6 weeks maybe since then.
So when I first was very honored to be selected as superintendent for Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District, I made a very intentional decision that I wasn't going to come in with a plan of how we're going to take and fix things and move forward. I really was very intentional about saying I needed to listen. Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District, we were sharing, has had a history of really doing some very good things, some very innovative things. There was a solid foundation. Certainly areas of strength, certainly areas that needed to get better, and I just felt I would do a better job as superintendent going out and visiting every school, going to community groups, having community meetings that were open to the entire public, some reserved just for our employees, and that was absolutely the case. What I learned and the passion that people have for education and the desire to not only see education get better in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, but the sincere desire to help were all parts that made their way into our plan. And so we made, again, a very intentional decision not to come out with a new strategic plan, but to say that we wanted to revise our current strategic plan, but to go even deeper in getting additional community input. So what we galvanized around was 8 goals that we felt really the research approved were the right 8 goals and the right 8 goals for Charlotte-Mecklenburg. Our school board adopted those goals. I'm very pleased about that. And then we have asked for additional community input in terms of if these are the goals, if this is the direction we're going, then how do we start to execute a strategy to have unprecedented success for all students. And so we've created 22 task forces. These task forces are being co-led by CMS leaders as well as community leaders. Every one of our task forces has teachers on them, parents, students. I'm really excited about that, support staff, as well as hundreds of individuals from the community, some with names that are very recognizable and some that are new faces in terms of education and that conversation. And so we're very excited about the work that these 22 task forces are going to do. They're very different. They're everything from identifying college and career readiness standards to how to better serve gifted students, students who speak English as a second language, how to build more productive higher ed partnerships, And so I'm really excited about the work of these task forces, and they're going to help us be a better school district.
John, can you talk about a little bit why the work of CMS and all the school systems is so important in terms of what happens when those customers become yours?
Sure. You know, the relationship between the K through 12 system and the higher ed system is really probably one of the most symbiotic relationships that you can find in our economy. Because what happens in K through 12 affects obviously what happens in higher ed, and what happens in higher ed obviously will influence kind of in a large degree what happens in K through 12. I think part of my college's focus is education as well. So what the framework that we think about public education in particular in regards to the work that Heath has been doing has been to really have an understanding of what we as universities need to bring to the table around teacher training, around the research and institutional support in regards to research, and to find best practices and disseminate that information broadly. In fact, when we recast our doctorate in education some years ago, we actually focused the research component on a problem of practice rather than a more theoretical, esoteric kind of approach to research. Which focused on, you know, some data collections that may not have immediate application. So we currently have all of our doctoral students actually working on a problem of practice to try to figure out what is the research out there, what is the best practice for that. And most of the work that's being done with that program currently is to inform a broad swath of the K through 12 community. But I think that the relationship between the two need to be much closer. One of the good things I think of Heath's plan has been that there is an intentionality around bringing universities and the K through 12 system and the community college systems much closer together. This community, I think, is when we came into Charlotte, the thing that struck me the most was how integrated this community was. And you just don't see that in many cities in the United States. And I think it bodes well for this community that the K through 12 system and the university systems that exist here really know who each other is and are able to kind of bring, you know, best practice to the table. It's only in working together that the whole system will be strengthened. And so kudos to Heath for taking this on.
Whenever we have these discussions about education, money is always quick to rise to the surface, as with most topics. I'm hoping both of you can talk a little bit about teacher pay and overall education spending because there is so much debate, particularly on the latter. Heath, why don't you start and give us some perspective on where CMS stands now in terms of salaries and budget and where it needs to go?
So, you know, I think all of us have a leadership journey that we've gone on, and every part of your journey has been important in kind of shaping your views and your perspectives. I was very fortunate to be in Maryland, a state that has made education spending a high priority, both K-12 and higher ed. I was in Montgomery County, Maryland, a county that you know, added to what the state provided. And so I saw, you know, because I'm a big believer that more money doesn't always result in better achievement, but when more resources are used strategically, I've seen in that district how you not only can put incredible targets out there, but really do things like narrow and close achievement gaps. Left Montgomery County, Maryland as an area superintendent, moved to Nevada as superintendent, and Nevada was very interesting because it had been the fastest growing economy in the country, and then with the Great Recession it just crashed. So when I got out to Reno, the second largest school district in Nevada, 65,000 students, it was right as the economy had turned, and so 42% of the entire state budget was in deficit. 42%, highest by far in the country. California was next at 20%. So it wasn't a question of were there going to be cuts in K-12 education and higher ed. It was how deep were the cuts going to be and how much flexibility would we get in terms of the resources that were still left. That being said, you know, we had to do more with less. And I'm really proud of the work that our community did to rally behind our public education system, our teachers, our principals, and we were able to move the needle, not as far as we needed to go, but we were moving, I think, in a good trajectory. So I think it is about resources. I think it's about how well they're being used. Budgets are priorities, and I think that's always important. We know in this work of improving schools that the most important lever that we bring that changes the lives of children is the quality of teachers. You know, there's a lot of things that impact education, but the most important lever that we bring, that we directly control, is the quality of that daily interaction between a teacher and their students. And so when you ask the question, where do we rank in terms of our fellow states, North Carolina funds education at around 42 or 43 out of 50 states. And a lot of people are surprised about that. And, but you know, you can check the National Council for Educational Statistics and many other, that holds up fairly well. So in terms of how do we compensate our teachers, on average, our teachers are about $10,000 less than the national average for teacher salary. The national average is about $56,000. On average, we're about $46,000 in North Carolina. So what does that mean? There's a lot of conversations right now about having pay for performance as a strategy to improve teaching and learning. I'm actually not opposed to looking at that, but what I always challenge anybody who says, well, what a great initiative, is, well, tell me why you like it. And people will say, well, we need to clearly articulate who are our best teachers and compensate them accordingly so that they stay in the classroom, they stay in North Carolina. Well, great. Well, let's start off with, are you sure you're getting your fair share of great teachers? Because if I come out of an institution of higher ed and I'm one of the best in the country, why would I go to a state where I'm going to get paid $10,000 less to do the same thing I love that I could go to Georgia, Virginia, or Maryland and get paid more money? I mean, that's just a, but let's say we've enticed you to come to North Carolina here in Charlotte, because it's a great place to live. Well, so when I say to someone, well, the pay for performance, you know, how big a bonus? They're like, what do you think, Heath, 10,000? So, all right, let's go with 10,000. So we identify you as one of our best teachers in Charlotte-Meck, and we give you a $10,000 bonus. And what we've done is to give you the average of a teacher at the national level. So that's our value proposition. Come to North Carolina, get paid $10,000 less, but if we identify you as one of the best, we're going to give you a $10,000 bonus to put you at the national teacher average. I think we have to at least explore that. We have very antiquated systems of how we compensate teachers. We know that. We can do better. I don't know if you can really get aggressive around a pay-for-performance system or changing those systems without at least looking at the resources, but it's clear it's an area we have to look at.
Mm-hmm. Before I have John answer, I want you to, can you address, you mentioned that you saw Governor McCrory, I think, yesterday, or you were in Raleigh.
I was in Raleigh yesterday.
You were in Raleigh yesterday.
Yeah. Did not see Governor McCrory now. My friend here did.
Yeah,
so.
Yes. So you were taking the temperature, no doubt, though, of our state capital. So give me your view on how optimistic you may be for increased education funding in the next few years.
Well, you know, I don't know if I would say I'm optimistic about increased educational funding. I think our state is going through a lot of challenges right now. There's a huge debt our state owes in terms of unemployment relief that we have to go back to Washington with. I think there's some other challenges, and so what I do believe is there's a lot of folks in Raleigh who are sincere about wanting to help improve the quality of education. I think there are a lot of individuals committed to trying to at least make sure that we're not going to have additional cuts. CMS and all school districts in North Carolina the last several years have had huge cuts. And that has been very, very challenging in terms of trying to improve the productivity and the outputs. So hopefully there can be some sort of stability around educational funding as there are very robust conversations about how to improve it. And so I've had conversations with leaders in the Senate, the House. I've had the opportunity to meet with Governor McCrory. I think everybody's sincere about trying to improve the quality of education, and you know, we're certainly how we fund it is one aspect of that.